Hi, I'm Neera Tanden. I'm president of the Center for American Progress. I, I am so excited to be here to talk about the 100 days into this administration and the interconnection between democracy and our economy.
And I'm Bernstein. I'm happy to be here as well with Neera. Neera and I worked together in various administrations, actually, but most recently the Biden administration. And I'm working with Neera at the Center for American Progress as well. So this is an alliance that's been ongoing and looking for great things going forward.
Great. So maybe I'll just start, Jared, by asking you, where is our economy today? We've had 100 days of this administration. So really just compare where we are in this moment of time to where we were, again, 100 days ago at the end of the Biden-Harris administration.
Well, Neera, there's a lot to unpack under what I'm about to say, but a great rubric for starting that conversation is that President Trump inherited a strong economy and he has squandered that inheritance. I and most other economists, and I'm talking about pretty much anyone who's not paid to think otherwise, recognize that this administration has inflicted a level of self-inflicted wounds or own goal kicks that's taken a strong economy to a weak one in about 100 days or less. And as you well know, it's really pretty hard in empirical economics to connect things that are happening in the economy to a single set of actions or even a single guy. In this case, it's alarmingly straightforward. It's the trade war, it's the chaos, it's the policy uncertainty, it's the threatening the independence of the Federal Reserve, it's the Doge cuts, it's a terribly recklessly budget process, and we can get into that. So all of that, but the wrinkle is, I could stop there, but the wrinkle is, and it's a big wrinkle, is that you really haven't seen it yet in the hard data. GDP, jobs, income, those data lag. Now, we're speaking on a Tuesday. Tomorrow, we're going to get first quarter GDP growth. That's expected to come in quite flat. And you asked about the economy they inherited. GDP was growing at 2.4% in the fourth quarter of last year. And that had been a steady, ongoing pace of above-trend economic growth. So it's a solid GDP growth rate. But we're looking for that to really slow pretty quickly.
Great. So I'll just follow up maybe a little bit on just the impacts of this. I think one of the things that's so surprising, and this I think will connect to democracy in a minute, is Donald Trump was elected to focus on the concerns of working class people, inflation, costs of living. Talk a little bit about the impact of his economic policies on those very people. People who are struggling to get by, who are struggling to make ends meet, working class people across the country who, I think we would both say were a bit battered by inflation, particularly a few years ago. But, in a weird way, he was elected to try to solve that problem. And how are his economic policies doing on that score?
Badly, and so I really think there's a very important list or agenda which comes under, again, the rubric of I didn't vote for that. And I'm thinking about it expressly in the way you're describing, Neera, which is people voted for Trump, for example, to lower prices and to lower interest rates, which of course he explicitly said he would do. Tariffs increase prices. Let's be very clear about that. There's been a lot of misinformation, although I will say, and I think the media has done a uniquely good job on this, it is now, I think, quite well understood that tariffs do, in fact, get passed forward. Tariffs are a tax on imports. They do get passed forward to consumers in higher prices. So we're going to see prices go up on imported goods. We're going to see the prices go up on producing here because more than half of what we import are inputs into our own manufacturing. Interest rates are still seeing some pressure because of some dynamics we've been discussing. I think the budget is in there as well. So I think that there is a real betrayal of people who voted for Trump to really help them. I think there's lots of ways in which he's hurting them. And I've just been talking about the economics. We should get into some of the policies, canceling the minimum wage for federal workers, things like that. Let me turn the tables, though, and ask you some questions. So I've just given you an overview of where the economy is and where I think it's going, which in some ways is more important. Could you connect that to really the theme of our conversation this afternoon, which is the economy and its linkages to democracy? How has the first 100 days led you to think about that?
Well, I think to step back, when we look around the world, it has been historically the case that economies that have inclusive political systems, stronger democracies, have had stronger economic growth. They build a stronger middle class that becomes a sort of a bulwark for economic progress. So from a long sort of historical tale, you'll see that basically democracies deliver results better, have stronger growth than authoritarian countries where, and this might sound familiar, authoritarian countries where certain elites are winners and losers. The government will pick winners and losers. Winners who pad the pockets of the authoritarian government or are close to the regime in other ways. And so, I do think we face this very stark choice between, again, an economy that grows more robustly for all of us and one that really does serve, the wealthy and well-connected. And I think what's really important for us always to remember is that it's the first that actually delivers better growth, stronger growth. And one of the things I'm so concerned about in the first 100 days is it's not just what the president is doing in particular on the economy, which is terrible and seems like profoundly oppositional to what he said he would do, but also the way in which he's undermining our democracy, attacking a free media that is holding him accountable for what he's doing on tariffs, attacking institutions that disagree with him. I sort of think he sees the country, or he and Bannon and Roosevelt see the country as a battlefield, and they are undermining our economic position in the world and also hurting Americans, not just through tariffs, but the budget cuts and other things. And at the same time, basically trying to fight and weaken institutions in their way, universities, the free press, law firms. And so it's a pretty destructive force, but what they have in common, you could sort of say, what do these things have to do with each other? I think one of the things that's so important to remember is when you have governments, perhaps authoritarian governments, who want to pick winners and losers, it becomes a very extractive economy that works for a very few, and that undermines our economic growth over the long term.
Yeah, thank you. And as we know, some viewers may know, there is a group of economists who recently won a Nobel Prize writing explicitly about that and documenting it throughout history. I mean, let me respond to some of that, Neera. Two things. One is your comments made me think of what's sometimes called crony capitalism.
Yeah.
And this is the idea, and I think it's really a huge motivator for the president. People do all kinds of ridiculous backfilling, trying to explain what Trump's tariffs are up to, what he's motivated by, and a lot of it is complicated global finance and currency movements. I think what he's motivated by is this incredibly wrong-headed view that anything we import from someone is them ripping us off. So that's as wrong as you're accusing the grocery store of ripping you off or selling you groceries. But also, the idea that the more he can get countries to grovel to him and people, business folks, leaders of industry to bang on the door of the Oval Office to get an exemption, that's a good day for him. So a great example of this is what happened with Tim Cook and Apple. They big contributor to Trump, to the inauguration, to his to various Trump initiatives, and they got an exemption on their electronics, at least for a while, from the China tariffs. So crony capitalism is in play in just the way you describe. And secondly, the other thing you made me think about when you talked about compromising institutions is the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
So if you go after, and they clearly have. Now, I get that, on alternate Tuesdays, they go back and forth, they dial back, and then they go back again. But Trump clearly does not consider an independent central bank an important thing. And when you go after that institution, we've seen in other countries explicitly in the spirit of your comments, Neera, that you've really unleashed even more inflation because presidents will always juice the economy to get more growth, regardless of its impact on price pressures. So our Federal Reserve has done I think, a very good job of managing a lot of challenging dynamics lately, and that's an institution that we really don't want to see the president screw around with.
Yeah, so I do think it's important also, as we hit the 100 days, to recognize that there are limitations, that there are times where Trump has backed down, the administration has backed down, and it's when they see a force that's willing to stand up to them.
Yes.
Jay Powell was basically saying, you can't fire me. I'm going to do the right thing by the economy regardless. And there was a lot of fear that affected the bond ratings and other things, and the markets were crashing, and then Trump had to say, and who knows, you're right, could change next Tuesday, but he had to say, actually, I was never seriously considering firing him, and then the market took off. So I do think what's also important to remember at this time, where he does have a kind of shock and awe politics that is designed to overwhelm, so people kind of enter into a fetal position, which, people can be very good at. It's really important to remember that when people stand up, as the Liberal Party in Canada did and won their elections, or Jay Powell or Harvard University, 3 different institutions you didn't think had anything in common until recently, they actually can succeed and push back. And in some respects, Trump, after Harvard stood up, the Trump administration put out an article, or there was an article that said, we didn't really mean all of that. It was like kind of a little bit of a walk down or a blink or something. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us in this.
Let's dig into that a little bit, Neera, because I think you're so right. I think it's absolutely essential to remember that resistance is not futile. And we've already seen these folks blink. The question I have in my mind, and what I'd like you to help us thrash out here, though, is let's say the Trumpies keep blinking when things, when the kind of pressure that you just described arises. And I'm going to think mostly in the economics lane. So the bond market starts to get wiggly and maybe they back off, or we could get this, quite weak GDP report tomorrow. Look, if GDP stays, in the 1 or below 1% range, unemployment will eventually start to rise, and we'll start to see real damage to job gains and the kind of things that people really pick up on. If the mortgage rate stays pretty high, which it's been kind of parked around 7%, all of that could lead them to continue blinking. If they continue, though, if that happens, if it's chaos back and forth, policy lurching, this drove me nuts, what Besant the other day called, Trump is applying his genius in strategic uncertainty. That's the name he gave to it. So,
also known as chaos.
Yeah, so anyway, we could end up kind of like not necessarily having a big bad recession, but just like slogging along. And just kind of downshifting from where we were, around 4th gear to something closer to 2nd or 3rd. How do you think that plays out in terms of how people feel about the economy, how people feel about the administration? In a way, it's almost harder for the opposition because you're not, look, there's a recession.
Yeah. Actually, let me put it in another way, which is, candidly, President Biden did the American Rescue Plan. It was a plan designed to ensure that we had a strong recovery. And because of the timing, a lot of people criticize that as spending a lot of money early on and connecting that to inflation, which is, if you think about it, a little bit of a hard connection, how much we're spending here and inflation, et cetera. But what's fascinating is people were able to really directly connect They had something that really reminded people, or actually located inflation at the steps of the president. And here we have a much closer connection. As you know, people are still concerned about high prices. They were hoping prices would go down. Very hard to do. And so I think what's kind of remarkable is that even when we had the economic growth of the Biden administration, people were pretty angry about costs being so high. So I look at through another lens. Donald Trump has put forward an agenda that can be directly tied to high prices, and he can pull back and make a deal here or make a deal there. But fundamentally, people have a locus for their concern about high prices, and it is the direct action of the president and what he's doing. And it might be he just pulls everything to 10% tariff across the globe, right? If that's where we end up, that is still an increase in cost for people. It is kind of like a national sales tax in a way on certain goods. And so, I think of it as I don't know that people measure their lives in, where GDP is as much as they measure their lives and how much is their income and how much can they afford. And he's making one side of that equation a lot harder.
I think that's right. And I also think, though, that there's something we haven't seen for a very long time in this country, and you and I should, the Fed as well, but we should be proud of this, which is that the unemployment rate has been low for a very long time.
Yes.
It's just been kind of parked around 4% for month after month after year, and that's been very good for people in the job market. If, in fact, the economy slows as I predict, and at this point this is the conventional forecast, this is not just me, this is pretty much every forecaster, the unemployment rate will start to tick up month after month. I don't think we're going to see that. We're going to get the jobs for April in a couple of days. I think it's going to take a few months for that to occur. So my only addendum is that we've been used to this very stellar job market in the background. That could erode, and people will notice that. So I think all of that is right.
Yeah, but I just want to step back for 1 second. And we're always in the news. We're always watching the news, and so when things change, but it is remarkable that just a mere 100 days ago, no one was predicting a recession, and now, or very few. And now, there was lots of predictions a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. That didn't materialize, which was important. A lot of action by a lot of people. The Fed played a role, of course, but so did the Biden-Harris administration. But now we're really in a space where, because of the things you mentioned, uncertainty, other issues, we're at that space where, people are, the conventional wisdom has completely flipped, and we could be in a recession. And really, that's going to have profound impact for small businesses, families, et cetera.
Right, and if you look at what the dynamics of how that works, it's often the case that it takes months for the authorities who date these things to say there was a recession. They're always, because of the way the data comes in with a delay, they're always months late on that. So what you have to look at now are what businesses and what consumers are saying. And what you have businesses and consumers saying is really very different, to your point, than it was a few months ago. Businesses in particular, we're looking forward to tax cuts and deregulation. Market investors, same thing. And we should talk a little bit about tax cuts because they are coming, and it's important. But in fact, these very businesses are now saying, and I'm quoting from lots of different anecdotes. And remember, the plural of anecdote is data. We have the anecdote. We don't have the data yet. That's a good nerd joke. I
laughed at your nerd
thank
joke.
You. Well, showing your nerdness, which I love. We're hearing things like, I was going to actually build that warehouse.
Yeah.
And now I'm sitting on my hands. I was going to increase the shelf space in my retail store. I'm holding up. I was going to build an extension on the house. I'm holding up. It is precisely that kind of pausing that is, again, at the level of anecdote right now, but aggregated up, and it tends to translate into real problems. If it's okay, I think it'd be good to turn to to the budget, what are you seeing that has you most concerned? And again, I do think there are economy-democracy connections here in the budget debate and both how it's playing out, some of the gnarly process in the background, and some of the cuts that are being proposed.
Yeah, so just I think what's fascinating about the reconciliation debate that we're having, so reconciliation is basically a process by which the Congress, with a simple majority, is trying to pass massive tax cuts, skewed towards the wealthy, but massive tax cuts, and the whole debate is how to pay for it. And I think this is the choice that they're really confronted by. One is slashing health care for working class people. So they have a big target on Medicaid. 90% of people on Medicaid in this country are either working or in school. They talk all about Medicaid work requirements and other things, which is really designed to just cut people from Medicaid. People who Medicaid work requirements, which sound good, I appreciate that they sound good, are just like a paperwork way to cut the rolls. And so that's what we're facing, almost best case scenario. But I also think it's important to remember that on the other side, they're thinking of dramatically increasing the deficit and debt in order to pay for in order to just basically not pay for these tax cuts. So that's really where the debate is: how much harm you inflict on Americans now, or how much harm is inflicted down the road. And you and I have been part of deficit, conversations about the deficit and debt for decades. I hate to age us that way, but it is true. But one thing that is really different right now, and I'd love you to talk about this a little bit more, is really the consequences of just incredibly large debt levels at this moment when the world is kind of questioning the dollar, where you are seeing the bond market in a rickety place. And really, there is possibly a big impact on long-term interest rates that we haven't seen in the past from mass deficit spending.
Oh, man, that's a rich and troubling area to noodle over. So I just want to point out that yesterday, myself and a colleague named Ryan Cummings wrote a piece for The Contrarian on precisely these points, and I commend folks to check it out. One of the things you're referring to there is what's being called, I hate this word, but they're calling it the Sell America trade. And this is the idea that Trump, in less than 100 days, has turned safe, risk-free assets into riskier assets, so that if you're going to be a creditor lending us money, now you want a bit of a premium on the interest rate to help protect your investment a bit more, because you don't trust what these folks are up to. And from what we've seen with the chaos and the lurching and the strategic uncertainty, you shouldn't. So we are carrying make the numbers simple, $30 trillion of debt. It's about 100% of our GDP. So what's a percent on that? It's $300 billion. So when you're carrying that much debt, a nudge up in the interest rate makes your debt service a lot more expensive. So point one, that's of great concern. But point two is for what? Getting back to what you were saying a minute ago, when I look at the problem of America and our income distribution, it's not that rich people don't have enough money. It's that low-income people are struggling. And that's not new to Trump or Biden. I've been struggling for a long time. But the idea that you're going to take from the poor to give to the rich is obviously terrible. And we've had that conversation for way too long. The fact that it's still ongoing is really just an indicator of how much money has corrupted these politics. But here's another wrinkle. Low-income people are getting whacked by service cuts, Medicaid, food stamps, student lending, all in the budget. We've seen the budget now, all in the budget. They're getting whacked by to help offset the cost of tax cuts for the rich, while, and here's a new thing, while they have to face higher sales taxes, which you correctly called import tax, a sales tax on on goods and services that lower income people consume. They disproportionately consume that stuff. Imports are disproportionately consumed by the bottom half. So you have this massive whack on lower income people from the budget and the tariffs together, that bit is new.
Yeah, and I think, we sort of started off in this conversation in this way space, but I wanted to come back to it, which is, this is what is amazing to me. I have to say, it feels like the longest con ever run on working class people, right? And I think it's real, like in the first administration, there was a lot of things Trump proposed, like getting the ACA, people who own the ACA are disproportionately working class people, that he was stopped from. But this administration, and you just named a few of them, is looking at higher tariffs, higher mortgage rates because of higher interest rates from its kind of chaotic actions, slashing services, and not like esoteric services. It's basic health care for people, housing services. The Doge cuts are really hitting the safety and security of the American people. So it's such an interesting thing to me because, he's a classic sort of authoritarian populist. On the other hand, he's basically hurting the people.
Look, we have a couple minutes, but you're triggering a really big question here. Maybe if it's too big, blow it off. But so in the Biden administration, we took office to help solve that problem.
Yeah.
What you just articulated, and I'm not exaggerating when I say we woke up
every day
trying to figure out how we could deliver on exactly what you just said. And, we did pretty well. And no question, inflation was too high. Costs really hurt us. But how, in the name of everything holy, after that, are we back here, in your opinion?
Well, I think this does say a lot about inflation. And, the truth is, and just to say, you and I both worked for a president who was very proud of the fact that 70% of the jobs that were created by the legislation he worked to pass on CHIPS and Inflation Reduction Act and clean investments, renewables, infrastructure, all of those things, 70%, 80% of those jobs went to people without a college degree. So it was very targeted on, and we very consciously thought about plants in places like Ohio or rural Georgia or Arizona, like reaching places that felt left behind. So I think this is one of the central questions as we go forward, and try to build a positive agenda, which is how do we build an economic program? Now, I think Trump is hurting the people. He was claiming he was going to help, which will give people a lot of opportunity. But I look forward to your work on that economic program.
I'm going to get some help, right?
Yes,
I'm not going to do it all by myself.
There'll be a lot of help, but we're all going to work on this. On how to answer this mail, and maybe it's just that in a space where we don't have that level of inflation across the globe, people will see it in a different way.
I think that's right, and I think that the way forward is, again, I'll repeat what I said a minute ago, looking right into the camera. Resistance clearly isn't futile, and so we need to obviously keep doing. I really do try to think, what have I done today to help? And I'm sure a lot of people viewing think the same thing. But my point, Neera, is that it's clearly essential for us to come up with a really clear, solid, what, where, for agenda that addresses exactly what you said, which is actually delivering to the people that they promise to but are betraying on a daily basis. So we know a little bit about that because we've done it before, but clearly we've not done a good enough job in helping people understand
and selling it and messaging it and all those things.
And
but also
with the inflation backdrop, that was a tremendously difficult barrier for us to get through.
Yeah, and I think we're in a different space now where I hope that the Trump administration's policies will help us show that contrast, because they'll actually see what
I think they are.
Yeah, I agree with that.
If you look at the polling, that people are on to them.
Yeah, and I would say, just to end, because you said so many times resistance isn't futile, I think it is really a critical point. It is really different to be in an administration and how it feels in the country when it's at 50% or 45% or 40% or 30%. And, in terms of institutions, It'll be a very different country if we're sort of at the end of the institutions caving versus the beginning. So it is real, and those institutions will really feel differently if he's at 40 or 30% or 35%. So resistance, opposition is crucial to saving our democracy and staving off the authoritarian threat, but it's also crucial to build that economic agenda for the future.